On the behalf of the whole Shamlal College fraternity, I welcome you, ma'am, and I extend my humble request to you to grace us with your intellect and insightful talk. Please, ma'am, welcome, ma'am. Ma'am, you are on mute.
Thank you, Mandira, for such an uh, you know uh, uh, big what do you call? I'm not so big person, but yes, of course, I'm also student of history like all of you are. First of all, um, uh, uh, I'm thankful to Dr. Professor Ramesh Kumar, the principal of Shamlal College, Dr. Prashant, Ramesh ji and Prashant ji, and Dr. Pramod. All three are my friends, very good friends, and of course, Dr. Manish Karmwar, whom I consider him a very good organizer. Even when he was with me, he used to, organize things for me and in such a fashion. And he is a very organized person. So he's continuing to do so. And all my dear students, I love all my students across the board, whether in them or not. I'm very close to the student fraternity. So I love all of you. So today we are talking what Mandira introduced. I'm closer to that. I'm not going into any controversy like the recent controversies, etc., etc. My focus would be as a teacher of history on what is Itihas Puran tradition, whether it fits into the definition of historiography or not. Why later on, if we have time, I mean, it's very large topic, so I don't think we'll be able to do justice in just 30 minutes. Of course, there is that the foreign historians often claim that India has no historiography, but is it true? I mean, and there's a debate, huge debate on this, but today that I would not take up because I don't think I have very little time left. So maybe if Manish and Pramod calls me later, we can discuss that. So I'm just joking. So today we would be talking on ancient Indian historical tradition, which we also call Itihas Puran tradition, and that is the historiographical trend of ancient India, and in which we will be, to start with, we'll be discussing the Vedic literature as a historical source, and also we would try to understand the importance of epic and the Puranas for the reconstruction of ancient Indian history or historiography. Uh, Generally, we know that there are three main traditions of historiography in the early phase of India. And early means ancient, I'm talking about early ancient period, and that is Vedic tradition, epic tradition, and the Puranic tradition. Since after Vedic, epic, and Puranic were intertwined and intermingled, so dates, we'll discuss that later also, that how there is problem of dates in these texts. The Puranic tradition is relatively of greater value in the sense that it is, the Puran Kars who were the first to record and preserve the dynastic genealogies and chronologies. We have, like in Vishnu Purana, we have Gupta genealogies, we have Shaka genealogies. So there's some Puran, not all. There are 18 Puran, but Puranas, but in some we have genealogies and chronologies also, which are, if we go by the Greco-Roman historiographic standard, they are the two legitimate constituents or components of the history, the genealogies and the chronologies. but which is generally lacking in Vedic or Puranic tradition. But in some Puranic traditions, we do get genealogies and chronologies also, the two important legitimate constituents of historiography or history. Their historical conception and chronological perception find reflection in the information they have supplied about the kings of different dynasties and the length of their reign. But they're very few, I must say. I mean, I'm not going into this debate right now that which Puran was talking what. I'm just giving a general because there's no time. So they have provided the dynastic history of India, maybe not in a systematic way, but up to the beginning of the Gupta rule. The details of the kingdoms and the dynasties of the Gupta or pre-Gupta, post-Gupta period were furnished by them with some chronological data through, though not very systematic, I would say. They are, despite this, are of considerable value. Now, the two words, Itihas and the Puran. Itihas and Puran, these are the two terms which are associated with the historiographical traditions of India. Itihas literally means thus indeed it was, and now it is called history. And the term Atihasika is mentioned in Nirukt of Yaksh, meaning history, long back. Puran means Purana, which is old, and includes the events and stories believed to go back to the ancient times. Later, these are the two definitions of Itihas and Puran. Later, by the first millennium AD, the term was applied to a specific body of text. Earlier, which was Purankaras, Purankars who were telling these stories, but later on it was organized into a body of text called Puran, which are primarily focused. Most of the Purans are focused on particular deities. Some, they are 18 in number, they became religious sectarian texts by providing information on myths and rituals associated with the deity. But some of the Purans have distinctive sections that are claimed to be historical, which we talked about in this. Um, in fact, it was the Itihas Puran tradition which marked the beginning of the ancient Indian historical tradition. And the what were the further constituent elements of these historical traditions? They were Akhyan, that is narrative. Akhyan signifies presentation of history in a narrative style. Itihas means past events. Itihas is, in real sense of the term, signifies history, which appears in ancient Indian literature not only as a record of the past, but also as a trustworthy guide to the contemporary culture and civilization. Even the Chinese historian Wei Li says that history is written for the posterity. Confucian philosophy is also this, that history is written for the posterity, future के लिए लिखा जा रहा है. So itihas is trustworthy guide to the contemporary culture and civilization. Even this Herodotus, Thucydides, Pliny, they all, they were jotting down the events, recording the events, they're recording for the posterity. They used to make it very lucid so that people read it. And the Puran. Puran means any old tale or the ancient lore. So Akhyan, Itihas, and Puran. These three constitute rudimentary specimen of history. In fact, they contain the seeds of history in its broader sense. It comprises ancient events arranged in the form of story based on historical truth. So, this is what this tradition says. The oldest Indian historical tradition is preserved in Rig Veda. The origins of Itihas Puran tradition go back to the form of embedded in the ritual text. And as the account of activities of heroes and chiefs tend to be scattered. ये सारे जितने वैदिक ट्रेडिशन में हीरोज और चीफ्स थे, इनके अकाउंट स्कैटर्ड फॉर्म में थे. They were not organized in a chronological form or in a sequential form. तो इसलिए इनको जोड़ने में लेटर हिस्टोरियंस को बहुत मुश्किलें आई, क्योंकि उनको क्रोनोलॉजिकल फ्रेमवर्क में डालना एक मुश्किल काम था, जो कि हिस्टोरियंस को करना पड़ा in defense of ancient Indian historical tradition. Why? Because यहीं पे सवाल उठता था कि जो इतिहास जो एंशियंट इंडिया में कोई हिस्टोरिकल ट्रेडिशन नहीं है, तो ये सवाल इतिहासकारों ने, जो इंडिजिनस इतिहासकारों ने उठाया कि जब ग्रीक हिस्टोरियोग्राफी का जेनेसिस होमरियन एपिक हो सकता है, तो हमारा एपिक ट्रेडिशन इतिहास पुराण ट्रेडिशन क्यों नहीं हो सकता है? क्योंकि जो हेरोडोटस था उसने भी होमर को सोर्स माना था लिखते वक्त. हालांकि जो होमर में होमरियन एपिक में जो इशू था कि किसी भी काम क्या वजह या उसको गॉड का ब्लेसिंग माना जाता था. हेरोडोटस तक आते आते ह्यूमन कॉज के लिए ह्यूमन इफेक्ट था, गॉडली इफेक्ट नहीं था. ये फर्क जरूर आ गया था कि वो मेन स्ट्रीम की तरफ आने लगे थे. तो सिमिलरली इन एंशिएंट इंडिया वी हैव दीज ट्रेडिशंस, द एपिक ट्रेडिशंस, जिसमें कि ऋग्वेद में दान स्तुति हाइम है, which is in the praise of generous patrons, and the narasamsi क्या है, hero louds, and the akhyan, that is narrative about the Aryan people, speak some sense of history of those who compose them. मतलब उनको जो इसको आख्यान को, दान स्तुति को, नरसिम्स को कंपोज कर रहे थे, उनको कुछ ना कुछ हिस्टोरिकल हिस्ट्री का सेंस था. उस समय हिस्ट्री एज अ डिसिप्लिन तो नहीं पढ़ाया जाता था, लेकिन दे वर ट्रेन टू टीच, दे वर ट्रेन टू राइट. तो उस ट्रेन टू कैरी ऑन फॉरवर्ड द ओरल ट्रेडिशन. सो उनको सम सेंस ऑफ हिस्ट्री रहा होगा. These hymns constitute the earliest evidence of historical sense in ancient India. The inclusion of narrative as a part of sacrificial ritual perhaps gave it greater credence, referring to contemporary heroes. कहते हैं कि जो narratives को sacrificial ritual में include किया गया और इससे contemporary heroes की significance बढ़ी, वो limelight में आए, और इसीलिए some of these narratives, because they carried the exploits of the Raja also, so they were termed as इतिहास. कुछ कैटेगरीज ऑफ ऑथर्स थे वैदिक ट्रेडिशन में जिसको कि देखने की जरूरत है. उनमें एक तो है ब्राह्मण, श्रोत्रिय, प्रेस्ट, who performed the rituals. इनका काम था रिचुअल्स परफॉर्म करना. They had different works, but all together they constituted the Vedic hymns. Brahman, Shrotriya, priest who performed the rituals. दूसरा, the poets, they were known as kavis in Sanskrit. Kavi, that would probably have included the Brahmins or the bards. Bards को भी कवीज में include किया होगा, ब्राह्मण को भी किया होगा और bards को भी किया होगा. We'll talk about bards also in detail. In Rig Veda, there is overlap between the functions of the priest and the kavi. जो ब्राह्मण, श्रोत्रिय, priest थे और कवीज थे, इनके फंक्शन में कहीं कहीं ओवरलैप भी देखने को मिलता है. एक ही आदमी दोनों काम कर रहा है, ऐसा भी हुआ है. कई पोएट्स के नाम सामने आते हैं ऋग्वैदिक ट्रेडिशन में. भाबरू, स्यावास्य, निबंध, नितेष्ट, काकसीवंत, ये सब पोएट्स के नाम हैं. और ये कौन थे? They were generally described as विप्र, कवि, सूत्र. तो कवियों के नाम भी ऋग्वेद में अपीयर होते हैं, लेकिन वो स्कैटर्ड हैं. जो लेखक हैं या पोएट्स हैं, हाइम्स को जो कंपोज करते हैं उनको कवि कहते थे, तो वो स्कैटर्ड है. The narratives refer to the exploits of the राजा, justifying their authority. ऋग्वेद में ये तो क्लियर है कि राजा था, किंग, प्रिस्ट और कॉमनर, तीन कम्युनिटी थी, एंड राजा की ऑथोरिटी को जस्टिफाई करने वाला कवि था, विप्र था, ब्राह्मण सूत्र था, जो कि भावरू, स्वयासा, निबंध नितेश और काकसीवंत इत्यादि थे. Bard. Bard in Rigved were regarded as more than just professionals, singing praises of the Raja. They are respected kavis, judged by the quality of the poem and the recital. Bards जो थे वो respected कवि भी थे और वो उनके पोएम का स्टैंडर्ड और रिसाइटल का स्टैंडर्ड डिसाइड करता था वो कितने इन्फ्लुएंशियल बड़े कवि हैं या छोटे कवि हैं. A comparison is made between the juice of the soma plant being decked with milk, the same way as the rajas are graced with eulogies. जिस तरह से राजास को तारीफों के पुल बांध देते थे ये बार्ड्स और पोएट्स, वैसे ही करते थे. जैसे सोमा प्लांट का बड़ा रिचुअल वैल्यू था ऋग्वेद में, तो ऋग्वेद में सोमा प्लांट को जिस तरह से मिल्क चढ़ाया जाता था उसी तरह से राजा के ग्रेस में बहुत सारी यूलोजीज पोएट्स लिखते थे, स्तुति, उनको स्तुतिज भी कहते थे. सो समटाइम्स दीज स्तुतिज वे आल्सो फैंटेसीज. फैंटेसीज भी थे ये स्तुतिज, बट रेफरेंस टू पर्सन एंड इवेंट रिड्यूस द फैंटेसीज. जब किसी खास राजा का, किसी खास वॉर का, जैसे बैटल ऑफ 10 किंग्स आता है, तो इट्स वेरी क्लियर दैट किसके बारे में बात, भारत वॉर के बारे में बात हो रही. सो यूलोजीज ऑन इंद्र victorious over Dasyus represent the deity as hero. इंद्र का दस्युस को हराना क्या था, उनको हीरो बनाता था. फिर और भी एक कैटेगरी ऑफ प्रेस थे, भृगु एंड अंगिरस. ये कई बार they jointly became भृगु अंगिरास, or they became distinct category of priests who performed the राजसूय. राजसूय यज्ञ होता था ऋग्वेदिक में एज में, तो वो बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग था कि भृगु और अंगिरास दोनों मिल करके भृगु अंगिरास कैटेगरी ऑफ प्रिस्ट बनते थे और वो जो है राजसूय यज्ञ परफॉर्म करते थे. एंड दे आर एसोसिएटेड विद अथर्ववेद आल्सो, वर्शिप ऑफ, and also with the worship of Agni. Bhrigu Hotra recited past narratives and Akhyan. Bhrigus were keepers of the narrative. वो सिर्फ रिसाइट ही नहीं करते थे बल्कि वो कीपर्स थे. वो ओरल ट्रेडिशंस को they used to push forward in their clan, in their community. This is how Rigved has been written, compiled. Bhrigus and Angiras had often Kshatriya wives, thus introducing a third category that came to be known as Brahma Kshatra. इस समय क्योंकि कास्ट सिस्टम बहुत रिजिड नहीं था, कास्ट सिस्टम नहीं था, सॉरी, ऋग्वेद के 10th मंडल में कास्ट सिस्टम 4 वर्णों का जिक्र है, कास्ट का नहीं, सॉरी, वर्णों का जिक्र है. लेकिन यहाँ पर एक नया कैटेगरी जन्म लेता है, उसको कहते हैं ब्रह्म क्षत्र, अ कॉम्बिनेशन ऑफ ब्राह्मण एंड क्षत्रिय. ये दोनों तो थे ही, ब्राह्मण क्षत्रिय, किंग प्रेस्ट एंड कॉमनर, ब्राह्मण क्षत्रिय. सो व्रत्य एक और कैटेगरी था, व्रत्य. दे वेर वॉन्डरर्स इन ऋग्वेद. वो एक जगह नहीं रहते थे, वो ब्राह्मण तो थे लेकिन जगह जगह घूमते रहते थे, तो उनको आउटकास्ट सा ही रखा है, तो वॉन्डरर कैटेगरी में रखा गया. इन द धर्मसूत्र the word vratya refers to a group which had fallen to perform or failed to perform the prescribed social and ritual duties. जो सोशल और रिचुअल ड्यूटीज थे वो तो व्रत्य परफॉर्म नहीं कर पाते थे, क्योंकि ना वो शादी करते थे, ना बच्चे पालते थे, ना फैमिली में रहते थे, बुजुर्गों की सेवा करते थे. वो तो वॉन्डरर थे, एक जगह से दूसरी जगह घूमते रहते थे. तो दे फेल टू परफॉर्म दे प्रिस्क्राइब्ड सोशल नॉर्म्स एंड रिचुअल ड्यूटीज. इसलिए धर्मशास्त्र में उनको अलग एक कैटेगरी बनाया गया जिसको सोशल आउटकास्ट के रूप में ही देखा जाता था. No such word was used, but they were, kept away from the mainstream. सुत और मगध एक और कैटेगरी थी. They were also authors of the seminal historical tradition. एक और कैटेगरी था जिसको कहते थे ब्राह्मण बंधु. लोग कहते हैं ना कि हिस्टोरियोग्राफिकल ट्रेडिशन नहीं था एंशिएंट इंडिया में. कैसे नहीं था? इतनी सारी जानकारी मिल रही है हमें. ब्राह्मण बंधुस who were inferior Brahmin of Magad, claiming to be Brahmin but not trained as such, had connection with the Vratyas. ये जो मगध के ब्राह्मण्स थे वो एक्चुअल में व्रत्य ट्रेडिशन से वॉन्डरी कैटेगरी से होकर के आए थे, क्योंकि वो घूमते घूमते नॉर्थ से मगध तक आ गए थे. तो उनको इंफीरियर ब्राह्मण माना जाता है. क्यों? क्योंकि जो ऋग वैदिक ट्रेडिशन को कैरी करता था, हाइम्स सीखता और पढ़ता और पढ़ाता था, वो ये नहीं करते थे. तो जो ये काम नहीं करता था, जो ट्रेन नहीं था रियल ब्राह्मणिकल वर्क में, उसको वो अपनी कैटेगरी में मानते ही नहीं थे ब्राह्मण. तो दे वेर ऑल्सो केप्ट इन दी कैटेगरी ऑफ ब्राह्मण बंधु और व्रत्य कैटेगरी. एक कैटेगरी है सुत. बार्ड और सुत को कई बार सिनोनिम मानते हैं. एंड दिस सुत हैड कनेक्शन विद द राजा एज चैरिटी. स्टेटस का सिंबल था, क्योंकि भाई जमीन से एक तो ऊपर उठ के चलता है, वो वॉर में यूज होता है, उस पे राजा बैठता है. It was not only a military equipment. It had a status because king used to occupy seat in the chair. And his proximity, this Sutta's proximity to the king was, making him very high in the pedestal in the society. And also, he narrated the exploits of the Raja. That also made him very important in the society. That he was close to king and he was also narrating the exploits of the Raja. क्यों important था? इसलिए कि जो वो बोलता था वही राजा के एक्सप्लॉइट माने जाते थे और उसी को ट्रेडिशन माना जाता था. तो इसलिए सुत का बहुत इंपॉर्टेंस था वैदिक ट्रेडिशन में. इज मेंशन टुगेदर विथ ग्रामाणी. ग्रामणी भी बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है. आप देख रहे होंगे नॉट इन दिस हमारे पूरे हिस्टोरिकल ट्रेडिशन में, फ्रॉम वैदिक ट्रेडिशन टू दिस पोस्ट गुप्ता एज, एंशिएंट इंडिया जहाँ खत्म होता है, और आज भी आई वुड से देयर इज कंटिन्यूटी इन दिस. ग्रामाणी और हेड ऑफ द विलेज जो है वो बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट रोल प्ले करता है. आपने देखा चोल पीरियड में भी इंस्क्रिप्शन बताता है कि विलेज पंचायत था, लोकल सेल्फ गवर्नमेंट था. और आज भी लोकल सेल्फ गवर्नमेंट को कितना इंपॉर्टेंस दिया जाता है, क्योंकि उसके बिना हमारा देश भी नहीं चल सकता है. तो ग्रामानी ऋग्वेद में भी इंपॉर्टेंट था और सुत के साथ कैटेगराइज था एज. एंड दे वेर Gramani, Sutta, they were listed among the 8 Veeras or the heroes and 11 Ratnin, jewels in the kingdom, who were important to the Raja in the ritual of Rajasuya consecration. जब राजसूय यज्ञ होता था तो 8 Veeras और 11 Ratnin used to occupy place in the Vedi. तो उसमें सुत और ग्रामणी भी रहते थे. ये भी बड़े इंपॉर्टेंट माने जाते थे. सुत को राजकृत भी कहते हैं, लिटरली मेकर ऑफ द राजा. क्यों? प्रेज्यूमेबली थ्रू हिज यूलोजीज ऑन द पैट्रन. वो जो बखान करता था राजा का, राजा के युद्ध के एक्सप्लॉइट्स का बखान करता था, राजा की वीरता का बखान करता था, उसकी वजह से इसको राजकृत भी कहा गया. The poems in praise of Raja would have been recited at 2 kinds of gathering. 2 तरह की गैदरिंग में इन राजा के प्रेज में जो पोएम्स थे वो रिसाइट किए जाते थे. यज्ञ, लिंक टू द रिचुअल. यज्ञ होता था, रिचुअल जैसे राजसूय यज्ञ हुआ तो पोएम पढ़ा जाता था राजा के गुणगान में. हीरो लाउड इन प्रेजेंस ऑफ किंग्समैन, या फिर हेरोडोटस जैसे हीरो लाउड करता था अपने ग्रीक सोसाइटी में. क्या करते थे ग्रीक हिस्टोरियंस, स्पेशली हेरोडोटस, कि वो अपनी ही बातों को, लिखी हुई बातों को पढ़ता था, भाषण देता था, और भाषण को बहुत ल्यूसिड बनाता था, जिससे कि ज्यादा से ज्यादा लोग आए और उसके बखान को सुने. जो भी वो हिस्ट्री लिखता था वो पहले ही क्लेम करता है, आई एम राइटिंग दिस फॉर द पोस्टेरिटी. मैं भविष्य के लिए ये सब कुछ लिख रहा हूँ कि ग्रीक हिस्ट्री में कितनी वीरता थी, क्या क्या हुआ, वगैरह वगैरह, वॉर्स कैसे वन किया है, एटसेट्रा एटसेट्रा. और उसके बारे में एक और कहावत है, इससे कंसर्न नहीं है फिर भी मैं बताऊंगी, कि लाइक हेरोडोटस एंड हिज शेड्स. इतना वो पागल था प्रेज के लिए, सुनने के लिए, कि वो जब जाता था भाषण देने और देखता था कि कम संख्या में लोग आए हैं तो ही यूज्ड टू वेट. वो तब तक अपना भाषण शुरू नहीं करता था जब तक शेड भर ना जाए. लेकिन बाद में हेरोडोटस से लोग जब बोर होने लगे तो जो लोग आए भी होते थे वो भी चले गए. इसलिए ये कहावत बन गई, लाइक हेरोडोटस एंड हिज शेड्स. तो इस तरह के भी बखान थे. तो यहाँ पर हम देख रहे हैं कि जो पोएम्स वेयर टू काइंड्स, वन इन यज्ञलिंग पोएम रिचुअल में होते थे और दूसरा हीरो लाउड में होते थे, इन प्रेजेंस ऑफ किंग्समैन. अच्छा, कुछ ऐसे क्लैन थे, कैटेगरीज थे, जो कि धीरे धीरे अपने हार्ड वर्क से दे वर्क देयर वे टू द मेन स्ट्रीम. कौन से थे? कन्व, भृगुज, अंगिरास, सुत. ये ओरिजिनली क्योंकि ऋग्वेद में इतनी फ्लेक्सिबिलिटी थी कि आप जो काम करते हैं उससे आपका पद निर्धारित होता है, तो these four categories slowly and slowly made their way to the mainstream. And it is possible that the compositions they controlled, which were kind of historical in nature, historical कहते हैं, quasi historical in nature, came to be seen as potentially valuable component of power, but not with the same value as ritual. रिचुअल्स को वैल्यू ज्यादा करते थे, फिर भी पावर वाज आल्सो उसको भी वैल्यू करने लगे. दिस मे पॉसिबली एक्सप्लेन व्हाई इतिहास पुराण ट्रेडिशन इज आल्सो रेफर्ड टू एज, इसको फिफ्थ वेद भी कई बार कहा जाता है इतिहास पुराण ट्रेडिशन को. द ऑथर्स ऑफ इतिहास पुराण ट्रेडिशन took history in a very comprehensive sense and attached more importance to the delineation of contemporary social, economic, political, religious, and cultural life of people, rather than describing this, historians say in defense of ancient history, when it is compared to Greek historiography, that rather than the description of war and battles, political conflicts and discords, we focused more on the socio-political, economic, religious, and cultural life. The Puran is generally applied to tales of primeval antiquity or ancient stories, whether quasi-historical, mythological, or fanciful. The Itihas or Puran is widest in its widest application of the term denotes historical account of events of the past, some historical account of the events of past, or primordial events of humanity is also recorded in Itihas Puran. Uh, earliest form of Itihas was based on oral traditions, which emerged in Vedic age. Written records of the tradition appeared much later. Written form of history began with written tradition, but literature of both Vedic and post Vedic times contain rudiments of history. Antiquity of Itihas, Puran tradition can be traced back to, of course, we are tracing it to the Vedic age and Rig Ved Samhita, the oldest Vedic text. The sense of ancientness of anything is imposed in the world in the same text. It has been used in the form of tale of hoary antiquity और टेल ऑफ होरी एंटिक्विटी को गाथा शब्द का इस्तेमाल किया गया है इसके लिए. यक्ष ऑफ निरुक्त ऑल्सो रेफर्स टू इतिहास एंड पुराण. कुरु डायनेस्टी का एग्जाम्पल भी इसमें मिलता है. गाथा, ऐतिहासिका, ये सब शब्द हैं. आख्यान जो कि इतिहास को डिफाइन करते हैं. अथर्ववेद संहिता में पुराण हैज बीन मेंशन्ड एंड Itihas, Puran, Gatha, Narsamsis by now were known to people. These words, इन सब का मतलब नरेटिव ही था, लेकिन इन सब का वर्ड जो है, इन वर्ड्स का वर्णन आपको अथर्ववेद में भी मिलता है. तैत्तरीय अरण्यक में मिलता है इतिहास और पुराण शब्द का मेंशन. गाथा, इसके साथ एक और वर्ड ऐड होता है, कल्प. कल्प का मतलब भी स्टोरी ही होता है. सो अ न्यू वर्ड अपीयर्स इन तैत्तरीय अरण्यक, दैट इज कल्प. और उपनिषद्स में भी हम देखते हैं इतिहास पुराण मिलता है. सूत्र में, सूत्र लिटरेचर में भी हमें इसका व्याख्यान मिलता है. यहाँ तक कि पाली टेक्स्ट में भी हमें इतिहास पुराण ट्रेडिशन मिलता है. तो बुद्धिस्ट और जैन ट्रेडिशंस में भी हमें इतिहास पुराण के बारे में जिक्र मिलता है. So there is no denying fact that in later Vedic age also Itihas assumed greater importance, and we have still the Itihas and the Puran are interchangeable, and इसको हम उस तरह से इस्तेमाल कर लेते हैं, इंटरचेंजेबली भी इस्तेमाल कर लेते हैं. कुछ हिस्टोरियंस हैं जो कि इसको इतिहास पुराण ट्रेडिशन के फेवर में या अगेंस्ट में बोलते हैं, जिसको कि अभी हम स्किप करेंगे और क्योंकि हमारे पास इतना टाइम नहीं है. इसके साथ हमें मिलते हैं टू एपिक्स. हमारे पास कितना टाइम है मुझे नहीं मालूम, क्योंकि 7 तो बजने वाले हैं. व्हाट डू आई डू, मनीष?
Ma'am, as you wish, a little bit about these two things, Ramayana and Purana, little bit, 5, 7, 8 minutes, ma'am.
To the, because it's a very lengthy thing and I cannot comprehend. तो दो एपिक्स जो हैं, द रामायण एंड द महाभारत, दे इंक्लूड almost all elements of historical traditions, and the text themselves be speaks of historical content concerned. वाल्मीकि ने खुद रामायण को पुरातन इतिहास कहा और महाभारत को भी इतिहास ही शुरू में जय इतिहास कहा जाता था. पुराण को तो आख्यान कहा जाता था. तो महाभारत और रामायण दोनों में इतिहास के कंटेंट हैं और द वर्ड इतिहास बार बार एपिक्स में आते हैं और इसमें कुछ और शब्दों का इस्तेमाल है. मैं ज्यादातर उन्हीं पे फोकस कर रही हूँ. पुरावृत, पुरावृत, आख्यान, पुराण, कथा, इन सब का एपिक में भी जिक्र है और इनको सिनोनिमस दिखाया गया है. बहुत लिटिल डिफरेंस है इसमें, माइनर डिफरेंसेस हैं, फर्क हैं, लेकिन इनको सिनोनिमस दिखाया गया है. हॉपकिंस जो महाभारत का ट्रांसलेशन भी करते हैं, लिखते हैं, द महाभारत indifferently called Itihas and Puran is also, claims the title of fifth Ved. The epic account in the present form is based upon the Puran. He further states that historical tales embedded in the epic is not wholly without scholastic affinity. ये जो कहानियां हैं ऐसा नहीं है कि इसमें कोई स्कॉलरशिप नहीं है, scholastic affinities हैं. Mahabharata is relatively more important than Ramayana from the historical point of view. This is what Hopkins says. It is no doubt a semi-historical work and encyclopedic in nature, containing a plethora of material relating to some conceivable aspects of ancient Indian history and culture. Pargiter also observed that this Mahabharata and to a minor degree the Ramayana profess to give account from the tradition about the earlier occurrences. पीछे एक्सकेवेशंस वगैरह भी हो रही हैं जिसमें महाभारत वॉर के कुछ ट्रेसेस हमें मिले हैं. दिस रामायण के बारे में भी काफी कुछ चल रहा है, उसके बारे में डिस्कस नहीं करेंगे. सो यहाँ नहीं डिस्कस करेंगे अभी क्योंकि हमारे पास समय नहीं है. तो ये जो एपिक ट्रेडिशंस हैं महाभारत और रामायण, इनके बारे में राजशेखर जो ऑथर थे इन से अबाउट 10th century AD, he identifies Puran with Itihas, and to him there are two different kinds of Itihas. वो कहता है इतिहास दो तरह का है, एक है परक्रिया. परक्रिया क्या है एंड दूसरा है पुरकल्प. परक्रिया focuses on only one hero. तो रामायण जो है वो परक्रिया टेक्स्ट है, and Purakalp is which focuses on several heroes. So Mahabharat is a Purakalp. Kalp हैं दोनों, कहानियां हैं, लेकिन परक्रिया है रामायण and Purakalp means several heroes, वो है महाभारत. So this is how historians approach Itihas Puran tradition in Vedas, epics and Puranas, and also in the writings of Jain and Buddhist texts, because they are also part of our historical traditions. We are not dealing with this right now. And the three legitimate constituents of this tradition were myth, genealogy, and historical narrative. And the impact of Itihas Puran, however, is discernible on historical literature of that period too. The concept of idea of history started changing as a reasonable extent from the 7th century onwards. लेकिन उसके पहले जो इतिहास था वो इतिहास पुराण ट्रेडिशन था हमारा, ऐसा नहीं है we were devoid of historical traditions. So Itihas and Puran developed as two distinct subjects of study, but the older tradition did not completely die down. The writings of Kalhan को mark करते हैं ना Europeans as the first historian of India. Kalhan was not the first, but he was best historian of ancient Indian historical tradition that bears the stamp of Itihas and Puran. Kalhan also started with mythical history. He also took sources from the Vedic, Puranic and epic traditions. So when he comes to his own age, then you find a clear picture of what he is writing. बाकी तो उसने भी sources के basis पे लिखा था. नीलमत पुराण जो था कश्मीर का, वो उसको कल्हन ने सोर्स माना था. तो ये सब कुछ देखते हुए, so the knowledge, our knowledge of ancient past rests mainly on these traditions, and this tradition is human testimony of long past, hence it is not to be discarded only because it contains discrepancies. I'm not saying that it's not full of discrepancies. This tradition is full of discrepancies like any other tradition, historical tradition of ancient times. Ancient Indian historical tradition cannot be put aside as a wholly unworthy of credence. It is general trustworthiness which can be tested by the result of discoveries and excavations. It may be examined and weighed with the aid of all information available to us. The ancient Indian historians have bequeathed us with a type of historical work, if you call them historians, which include the dynastic annals, genealogical records, historical biographies, local chronicles, historical narratives, regional history, etc. The historical sense of ancient Indian writers is eloquently reflected in the works they have left behind. Uh, I think I should stop it here now so that students get chance to discuss with me. There's much more to say about this historical tradition, but the time does not permit. So I'm stopping it here now.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am, for the informative session. So I would like to call Mr. Ashish for the conduct the question answer session, please.
Thank you, Mandira, and thank you, ma'am, for this knowledgeable education of our tradition and Purana. Now I will summarize what we learned today. We learned the two concepts of historiography, that is genealogy and chronology. In some Puran, there is a genealogy and chronology. बहुत सारे हिस्टोरियन ने पुराण की क्रोनोलॉजी ठीक किए हैं. इतिहास पुराण and tradition mark the beginning of the historical tradition. Ityas is trustworthy guide to the contemporary tradition. We also learn the different categories of authors, that is like Brahman, Shruti, poet, Brahman, Satra, Vatya, Suto, and Magda. Sudra was we also, hello.
Go ahead.
Yes, you are audible,
Yes.
Ashish.
Sudra was
Go
also
ahead.
very important in historical tradition. Historian who wrote history always wrote in praise. आपने हेरोडोटस के माध्यम से हमें बताया कि हिस्टोरियन हिस्ट्री लिखते समय कैसे लिखते थे. Antiquities of Itihas Purana and tradition can be traced out from the Rigveda. You also told us about two epics, that is Ramayana and Mahabharata. And you also told about the two type of Itihas, that is Prakriya and Purakalp. Prakriya, that means one hero, and Purakalp, that means several heroes. Now I will start with question answer round. Now I will call Mr. Ajay for with their question.
This is not question answer round. Only the idea is gaining from Professor Singh. So it's not question question answer round. Yes, Ajay, go ahead.
First of all, thank you, Professor Bam. You had really depicted a very nice observation of Itihasic and Puranic tradition. I hope I'm audible. I just wanted to ask, ma'am, like on the scale of 10, like without any that, on the scale of 10, how much would you say that the Itihas, like Puranas, are like the kitna Itihas or kitna Upanyas, like Puranas? If I would talk about like they are containing kitna Itihas or kitna Upanyas on the scale of 10, if I would ask.
देखो इतिहास को की इस तरह से स्केलिंग नहीं हो सकती है because it is based on the arguments. So and how you put a text that because it is regarding the sources you adopt. So in the scale, you can't scale because I am talking about, we know that there are a lot of discrepancies in these sources. And the most important discrepancy is the lack of chronology for these sources, which we are sufficing from the other sources as well as the archaeological sources. So I would not like to scale it in measure it in the scale of 1 to 10 because I don't think we read history like this.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Now next query is of Siddharth Yadav. Mr. Siddharth Singh Yadav. Ma'am, he is asking about Bhrigu was a category or a single person.
Bhigu, they were Bhigu, not so the Bhigus were the authors, category of authors. You may call it clan also, but I have put it as category of others.
Okay, next query is of Archana Bharti. Miss Archana Bharti, you may ask your question directly.
Yeah, good evening, ma'am. First of all, it was a very insightful talk, and thank you so much for giving us such valuable insight. Ma'am, my if then the question is that we were taught in our class that epics and Puranas are basically theologies. So, how can we actually like the Mahabharata and Ramayana? They are at least considered theology. So, how are we like going to study history from theology?
It is a religious text. There is the basis for this text is religion. There's no doubt about it. But the text contains the information on society, economy, polity, wars, love, hate, hatred in the society, intermingling, intermarriages, pratilom, anilom, anulom, vivaha, and all that. So a religious being doesn't mean that it doesn't contain historical information. रिलीजन जो फॉलो करते हैं वो भी तो व्यक्ति होते हैं ना, उनके और भी एस्पेक्ट्स होते हैं ना लाइफ में. सो इट इज दिस which makes it historical or quasi historical. Okay, it is epic traditions are religious because they are related to our, the cults which we follow, but that doesn't have a glimpse of society or economy. So that's it.
Thank
Next
you, ma'am.
query is from Saksh History Department.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, my question is that in your views, nowadays, how do epic affect our culture and tradition?
Affecting culture, tradition, it does- देखो, there are two. One is that you doing history, and when you are doing history, you are doing religious history also. That is one. But if you are talking about individuals being affected by the epics, it depends how one reads this, what point it raises in his mind. So that influence by what epic a person in individual influence. So that's the subject of um, okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Hmm.
सो आई थिंक इट्स ओवर. किसी और को क्वेश्चन है नहीं तो फिर अब मैम को भी काफी वक्त हो गया तो हम लोग इसको फिनिश करते हैं.
Sir, last question is from Miss
हाँ,
Nikita.
yes, go ahead. One, this is last, yeah.
Yes, sir. Miss Nikita.
Hello. So, ma'am, my question is how did the early Indian historical tradition as reflected in Itihasa Purana emerge?
Emerged. It has emerged because when we were searching for the past in the colonial period, and when the Europeans were highlighting past, especially the Greek Romans, they were tasting history from the Rome about the European superiority, and there was a need to discover or rediscover the ancient past. We were not reading Sanskrit text in the colonial period when this question of nationalism arose. We were looking into these religious texts about the glimpses of the past society, past culture, past wars, past majesty of the Indian civilization, so that we could put forth before the Britishers this argument that we can have self rule. We are capable of doing it. We were very majestic in the past. So that is how this tradition started. And the colonials helped us in doing so by mistake, because that time they were trying to understand the culture of India so that they could control more of us. But what happened when they, because Sanskrit is a very difficult language, not everyone knew Sanskrit. But when they translated this into English, the English language, many people, educated people, they learned Ramayana, Mahabharata. It's very sad that we didn't know our own language so well as we knew English, but they could know about the past through that. That also helped us. There's no doubt about it. They were trying to translate it for their own benefits, but that benefited also us also. So that is how we discovered we brought the social, economic, and other aspects of past also along with the religion. कहते थे सपेरों का देश है, पूजा पाठ करते हैं, रिचुअल्स करते हैं. हमने बताया कि इन्हीं टेक्स्ट में और भी बहुत सारी चीजें लिखी है जो तुम नहीं बता रहे हो, वो हम बताएंगे, हम हिस्ट्री बनाएंगे. सो दैट इज हाउ वी स्ट्रक्चर्ड आवर हिस्ट्री. इसलिए उस समय के, उस काल के लेखन में बहुत सारे आपको एक्सेजरेशंस मिल जाएंगे, बहुत बढ़ा चढ़ा करके लिखा गया, लेकिन उनकी कोई गलती नहीं थी. नेशनलिस्ट हिस्टोरियंस ने उसको बढ़ा चढ़ा के इसलिए लिखा क्योंकि उनको प्रूव करना था कि हम आपसे सुपीरियर हैं, आप हमको गलत इंफॉर्मेशन दे रहे हो पास्ट के बारे में. इसलिए उसकी हिस्टोरिसिटी को फिर क्वेश्चन किया गया और रीराइटिंग हुई और अभी तक हो रही हैं. Again we are going back to the past and looking into the past. So this is, I mean, from different ideologies. That is what this part does. Ji.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, for clearing all our doubts. Now I will call Mandira for further proceeding. Miss Mandira.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am. It's really very insightful talk, and I'm pretty sure that everyone must get something inciting from this. But due to the time limitation, we haven't touched few, specific points. So we definitely gonna listen you, ma'am, again and again. Now, in the end, वो कहते हैं ना जिसका अंत भला तो सब भला. So for the final conclusion, I would like to call Malik sir to conclude the session and also present the vote of thanks. Sir is an assistant professor at Shamlal College Evening in Department of History.
No need to introduce me in my college. Okay, and ma'am also knows me well. So thank you, Mandira, and thank you, Mr. Assis and Mandira. And you have conducted very good all these sessions about the introduction and about the question answer, ma'am. It is our privilege to hear you at a length in this DIGINAR. This is not my first time, but for my students, this is also first time. And it is always been a pleasure to listen to you every time. And new arguments and new ideas are coming out from every time your deliberation. So you have tried to burst this myth that Indian people has no sense of history. आपने ये कोशिश की अपने इस आइडिया से कि भारतीयों के पास इतिहास लिखने की समझ नहीं होती है, जो हेगेल और अल्बेरूनी और जेम्स मिल ने शुरू की थी. एंड फ्रॉम बिकॉज आई एम ए मॉडर्न history student, so what I call it's a colonial construction, because when the Britishers came to India, they define the modalities of governance, and the first modalities, that was the historiography. So he produced abundant historiographical pattern, like history of Maharashtra, history of Marathas, history of Rajputs, Karnal Toad. So from my sense, they misunderstood our past, and they tried to manipulate our mindset and our writers, and what you call it's a colonial construction. But it's not easy to only call colonial construction. And ma'am has told so many things about the Itihasa Puranic tradition. And ma'am also like to compare Greco-Roman historiography to Puranic historiography, battles of king, categories of priest, सूत, वर्ड्स. मैम ने ढेर सारी चीजों को आपस में एक दूसरे से जोड़ने की कोशिश की है, और लास्टली ये बात एम्फेसिस की है कि वी नीड मोर रिसर्च ऑन दीज टॉपिक्स, एंड यू पीपल आर यंग स्कॉलर्स, so do it fastly, because abundant sources are here and there. And lastly, what is history? काफी question उठता है. So history must be humanistic. History must be for the self search. History must be inquiry, and history must be to a path where we fulfill the desire of the most of the human being. That means history self search. The ultimate definition of history is a self search. If you do self search in those ideas, then it is history. Otherwise, this is theology. जो हम बोलते हैं धर्मशास्त्र वगैरह. For these words, this is my concluding remarks. For this word, it's an honor to offer a vote of thanks at this forum on behalf of Department of History, Sakshya, our student society, IQAC, I, Dr. Manish Karma, express my gratitude, all present here. We are grateful to Professor Vijaya Laxmi Singh for this valuable time and in-depth insight on. We are thankful to all participants for tuning in and sharing their queries with us, and thank this opportunity to thank you, our principal, sir, Dr. Ramesh Kumar, sir, IQAC convener, Dr. Kumar Prasant, teacher in charge, Dr. Pramod Kumar, Dr. DN Singh, and two young colleagues of our department, Dr. Seema Meena and Mr. Ajay Kumar. And I also acknowledge all faculty members who have graced this occasion. I appreciate the whole overwhelming participation. Sometimes it could reach 100 to each of one in History Society, GSTS and JCC. Again, thank you all for coming and grace this occasion.